Good afternoon. Welcome to the USC campus and welcome to CREATE's Distinguished Speaker Series. We are open for business, unlike our sponsor, VHS, so we're happy that you're here. I want to give a special thank you for those people who are in our local Southern California agencies and California government that have supported CREATE by opening their doors and letting us use their facilities, their venues, as a learning laboratory and a research laboratory. This has been very important to the success of CREATE. And we started this Distinguished Speaker Series as a way to reach out and say thank you for your cooperation. So let's give a hand to all those people that are in the agencies that in Southern California are actually doing the DHS security work. We do a number of things at CREATE. We do a lot of research. We have outreach activities such as this one, and we have educational programs. I wanted to take a few minutes, 3 minutes, to show you a short video about one of our outreach educational activities. It's our executive program. Can we roll the video, please?
Threats can develop quite fast and from directions that we don't anticipate.
And so terrorism is a different challenge, and we had to adapt to that.
The executive program is designed to serve the professional needs of upper-level managers in governmental agencies and other enterprises that have an interest in counterterrorism. So it's a combination of lecture material from top-level authorities, combined with experiential exercises. We go to the harbor, we go out to one of our major theme parks and look at the security there.
The CCTV observers can cancel, consume them, they can task them from here.
This is the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority Rail Operations Center. Should infrastructure be targeted or become degraded because of a natural disaster or an accident, this is the location where we can start the response and recovery process.
I'm here to see how it operates. It's an integral system, it's complicated, and I think it's beneficial for us as students to see how it all functions.
Right now our main project, of course, is the international terminal.
Our airport is small, but it's busy.
If you want to hit an airport, you wouldn't attack the airport, you would go in line.
So, threat number one, what do you think?
What I really hope for them to understand and get from this is the interconnectedness of this port to all the other critical infrastructure in the United States. The majority of crates and containers and goods come into the United States this way, and so it's extremely important that we protect this port, because if we were to lose it because of a natural disaster or some man-made event like terrorism, it would be a catastrophe for half the world.
We spent a day with the students from the seminar at the port, helping them understand a little bit better how the port operates and some of our issues with respect to security and business and emergency management.
Dicey information normally comes to us from LAPD.
Closure.
Does this mean anthrax is treatable?
Yes, Johnny.
We want them to get an appreciation for the importance of using reasoned logic and quantitative methods for tackling homeland security problems. The idea is to get them immersed in various venues where counterterrorism activity is part of the everyday operations.
CREATE, it's a great program. It gives us the opportunity to visit critical infrastructure that we otherwise wouldn't visit.
And I think it's important that we continue to research and immerse our students in this environment so we can come up with innovative ways to protect it, secure it, and get a bit more efficient and effective at protecting it.
Thank you. We will be offering the executive program. It's 1 week long this next summer. We've revamped it somewhat, tried to make it a little more interactive. We're also doing a little economic analysis and lowering the tuition rate on it. Hopefully we can draw in more people. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Errol Southers, he's a newly Dr. Errol Southers, to come on up. Errol does so much for the center. One of the things is he's the spark plug behind this Distinguished Speaker Series, and he is responsible for it. But he's also our Director of Research Transition, which is a very important function, which allows us to get our research findings out into the hands of practitioners. Errol, the program is yours.
Well, good afternoon. It always helps to have leadership that has the confidence and trust in you to do almost anything. And the video you just saw in the executive program, I was fortunate enough to, at the time, be brought on to create by Dr. Van Winterfeld, who was our first director. And we went to him with this idea to mirror a program that I was familiar with in Israel and now teach in Israel, an executive program in counterterrorism at the Interdisciplinary Center there in Herzliya. And I said, Detloff, I have this idea, and I want to do this executive program. It looks like this. He said, I think I can set it up in about a year or two. He said, no, let's do it this year. And so we did, and now we've had it for 5 successful years. And with a little innovation, perhaps with my crime partner, Narir Kelly Bukola, we're thinking about, after meeting with about 10 to a dozen representatives from sub-Saharan Africa yesterday, through interpreters from nations where, unfortunately, they're victimized by improvised explosive devices about every 2 to 3 days, we may, in fact, reach out and try to offer this program next year in 2 languages because they very desperately want to come, and the State Department may sponsor them. So another challenge for us, and I think another opportunity for collaboration. I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing one of my deans. As you may know, CREATE is shared by the Viterbi School of Engineering and the Saul Price School of Public Policy. Jack Knott is the C. Irwin and Ione L. Piper Dean and Professor of the School of Public Policy. He's a leading scholar in the fields of political institutions and public policy, health policy, and public management. Most notably, he's been elected as a fellow to the National Academy of Public Administration. In addition to the National Academy of Science, which includes the National Academy of Engineering and the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Public Administration is the only other congressionally chartered national academy. It also gives me great pleasure to announce he was elected recently as president of the National Association of Schools of Public Affairs. He's been a supporter of CREATE since the beginning. He's been a friend and a colleague of me personally. It gives me great honor and privilege to introduce Dean Jack Knott.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Southers. Doesn't that sound good? I like that. I would reiterate what Errol has just said. CREATE has had and has such great leadership, and I was sitting with leaders here at this table. It's been great to work with all of you, and we're very proud to have the center as part of the 2 schools. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Jane Harman, and as many of you know, Jane is the wife of the late Sidney Harman, and I have introduced Sidney many times because he used to lecture around the school, this campus, including our school, and he always said to me, when you introduce me, don't ever use notes. He hated it if I, used a note. He wanted me to just introduce him. So I practiced and practiced, but he has so many accomplishments that it was very hard to do. And definitely introducing Jane, that's going to be impossible because she has equal, if not greater, record of accomplishments as well. As you know, Jane is the president, first female president of the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. I just learned that they are also affected by the government shutdown, so about 1/3 of their employees are on furlough. So a bit of a stress facing the center as well. And that comes after an incredibly distinguished career As a member of the Congress, really representing Southern California and especially the aerospace industry, which I guess is how she got involved in the issues of national security, but served on all kinds of key committees in the Congress having to do with intelligence and with issues having to do with homeland security, as well as going on fact-finding and other in the field missions. So she just wasn't sitting in Washington. She actually traveled to Afghanistan, Syria, and many places around the world, engaged, including Guantanamo Bay, actually, seeing what the security issues are. She's been recognized highly for a lot of her work, receiving several medals and awards from several departments, which I won't read because she's telling me not to. But you can look in your program and you'll see that she has really done a remarkable, has had a remarkable career and been recognized by several federal and other agencies. She's a graduate of Smith College and also Harvard Law School. And most important for us is she's a member of the USC trustees, of the USC Board of Trustees. So I got up this morning and opened the door, and there on my doorstep was sitting the mail, and it was The Economist. And on the cover was the new war on terror. And if you open it up, it says, the West thought it was winning the battle against jihadist terrorism. It should think again. That's kind of the headline. And when you read it, it's a pretty sobering account. So there's no more important subject, and there's no more important person to talk to us about this subject than Jane Harman. Has had an incredible record of leadership and involvement in national intelligence and homeland security issues in service of our country. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Jane Harman. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon to many, many good friends. I'm always happy to come back to Create. I was trying to remember all the times I've been here. I know I was here, Dr. Earl, with Michael Chertoff when he was the Homeland Secretary. He was out here. Everybody's nodding. And I think Create was a baby. I think this was 5 years ago or so. He and I became very good friends when he was Secretary and I was on the Homeland Security Committee. I ultimately chaired the Intelligence Subcommittee. And he came out here and we did a number of things looking at security issues, but we came here and he spoke. And then, right, Earl remembers, I was here with my late husband giving the degrees to one of the executive classes, I think the first class. And I have followed Create very carefully, and in my 119 dog years in Congress, I was always worried about the care and feeding of Create, along with many of you. And I value the technology that you invent and the ways in which you come up with algorithms and other things that make us safer. And I also value the fact that Earl's job, so far as I understand, is to make that directly relevant to the user community. So my friend Lee Baca gets the advantage of what Create does. Let me just give you a few other biographical pieces of information about me. Number one, I'm a USC mom. I don't know why that isn't important. Hey, yeah. My number 3 child graduated, Dan Harman, from the Marshall School in 2006, and in his last year he was awarded the Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And why that is relevant is it was kind of a big deal. 2 years later, Sydney Harman got it. They give it to a student and then to some big dude in the private sector. And so Dan and I showed up for Sydney's award and said, hey kid, you know, we were playing catch up. But I'm a USC mom. There is something now here called the Sydney Harman Academy for Polymathic Study, which was Sidney's central interest at USC. What he was interested in is how people learn and how they integrate information from different disciplines. And the Academy is going strong. I'm really proud of it. And tomorrow there will be a trustee meeting here of the big trustees, but then there will also be a board meeting of the Harman Academy, and I'm looking forward to doing both of them before I take the red eye back to Washington, because, as you heard from Jack, this shutdown is not only the most irresponsible thing Congress could possibly do, but also it affects the Wilson Center, and I'm sure lots that you do too, and it affects real people. And there are a couple of the people at the Wilson Center who are furloughed, who are real hardship cases. And learning about their lives and learning why missing one paycheck is devastating for them is just breaking my heart. And so Grandma here wants to go back and do what I can to be helpful. I still live in LA. Lee Baca is my sheriff. Michael DiVirgilio, who's right there, who's on the Hermosa Beach City Council and will be mayor for the second time, and used to be my district director, is somebody I care a lot about. And Wanda Austin, I don't know if Wanda's still here, but she was here. Who heads the Aerospace Corporation, is my dear friend Rockstar. And what happens in LA has huge impact on what happens in our country. And I care that our ports are safe. I care intensely that our ports are safe. And thanks to CREATE, some of the technology is helping them be safe. I care intensely that our airport be safe. It was the intended target of a terror attack before 9/11. I think you all understand that. And I care that our citizens be safe. What happened in Nairobi could very easily happen in any shopping mall in America. And as soon as that happens, our public is going to have a pretty different conception of what our government ought to be doing to find out in advance who's trying to attack us and prevent those attacks. So I've stayed in the game, and I just want to outline a few things. And then my thought is I'm having a conversation up here with Earl, and he can ask me a few questions, and so can you. Maybe the way to start is to tee off on that economist story that Jack mentioned. And by the way, I was very proud to give the graduation address at the Public Policy School a couple of years ago. Thank you. That was an honor. Start with that. I agree with that. Terrorism is not dead. The core al-Qaeda that lives in Pakistan mostly is decimated, even though Zawahiri apparently still knows how to use a cell phone and has communicated some messages. But the new face of terror is a loosely affiliated set of groups around the world, plus a bunch of lone wolf actors, many of them in the United States, but not exclusively, who are radicalized on the internet. And we better get it that threats against our country are more diverse and that they are evolving. And the requirement is that we evolve too. The old responses don't work or won't work against the new threats. And we have to be smarter and better than they are. And we have to understand that they attack us asymmetrically. They're looking for where we're vulnerable. They have to be right once, we have to be right 100% of the time. 100% is not achievable. As I often say, as a mother of four, perfection is not an option, except for my grandchildren. And so it's a huge challenge. And we are doing okay. We really are doing okay. We've gotten a number of things right. And we still have a number of challenges. And so let me just mention some of the good things. Why don't we do something positive, say something positive that I think are relevant. Info sharing is much better. This is something all of us have worried about. 9/11 was a failure on many fronts, but it was a particular failing on our ability to share information, to share it federally, horizontally, federally. I guess also vertically, because two of the bombers whom we might have found were in San Diego. But at any rate, it was a failure of information sharing. And the effort, the focus of intelligence reform, the Intelligence Reform Law of 2004, which I worked on intensely and was a principal author of, was to change this the culture of need to know to need to share, and to provide a joint command across our intelligence agencies, and then a streamlined way to share information vertically. We're doing much better. It ain't perfect, but we're doing much better, and I think all of you would acknowledge that. And the formation of fusion centers, JTTFs and other efforts and things like this all help in the information sharing challenge. Of course, the other side of this is sometimes we make it too easy to access information, and the WikiLeaks problem, Bradley Manning, was too much sharing of diplomatic cables, and a kid like him was able to access that. We've corrected for that. And this really dreadful Snowden event is also somewhat related. As a systems analyst and a young man, he was able, with thumb drives, which are illegal, to extract boatloads of information from our most sensitive sources. And I'm assuming, I think any of you should assume, that that information has been fully exploited, possibly by China, but surely by Russia. It's a devastating set of leaks. And part of that has to be corrected too. Part of it is our clearance system. Part of it is the fact that we don't have checks on kids in sensitive jobs like this. We don't have the two-person rule, so that his actions would have been more carefully monitored. Part of it maybe is his job description. Maybe not one person should not be able to do all the things that he was able to do and to exploit. But at any rate, information sharing is much better. Another problem, aside from abuse from inside, is overclassification. That's something that impacts directly on what law enforcement can do to protect us. If something's classified and people don't have clearances, not so good. Sources and methods need to be classified, but a lot of information is overclassified, and we have to find the way to fix that. It's also ironic that information collected at the local level and sent up to Washington, to the Homeland Department or the NCTC, often is classified on the way up. And that, again, creates problems at the federal level and creates problems if that information is subsequently to be shared with other law enforcement agencies. So classification is still a problem, but info sharing is much better. And we certainly learned in Boston that as devastating as that attack was, that we're doing much better on information sharing, and we're doing much better with resilience. A huge challenge out there is cyber. Nobody has missed that. We're not good enough. We don't think creatively enough. We don't have enough cooperation at the Department of Homeland Security, between the Department of Homeland Security and the private sector. The private sector has not believed that Homeland has enough capacity. Janet Napolitano, in the last year or so, worked hard to correct the problem. Hopefully it will be worked on by her successor, whoever that is. It's really a shame that there hasn't been a nomination yet. California has created a statewide cyber task force, first state to do it. Yay, California, really important to do. And California also, or DHS, has put together something that I think is very helpful and will be helpful for California, which is this visa exit tracking system in the updated Homeland Security Information Network, HISN. That's something that many of us have believed needed to be done for years. Now it's being done, and that should be helpful. So let me just put out there a few more general comments. We're not going to win this struggle just by collecting better information. That's part of it. We have to do it. We have to prevent the bad guys from attacking us. And we have to be pretty tough when necessary. I'm someone who supports an appropriate use of drones and other kinetic technologies that we have. I support what special forces do, again, under strict rules. But just taking out bad guys is not a strategy. It's an important piece of a strategy. The strategy has to be to win the argument. We have to project our values. We have to show that kid in Yemen trying to decide whether to strap on a suicide vest that he has some better options, which include getting educated in ways that are relevant to getting a job. A lot of educated folks in the Middle East who have no access to jobs. And living in a society that is fair. We have to project that living in this society is fair and that the rule of law applies to everyone. That's why Guantanamo Bay is such a black eye for us. And I do believe we should close it, and I hope we are finding ways to deal with the people who are there, including trying more of them in Article III federal courts, which have convicted over 400 people of terrorism-related crimes since 9/11. But at any rate, we have to live our values, and we have to win the argument out there. And something I can do as head of the Wilson Center, which is a fabulous perch in Washington, is do programming, recruit scholars, develop ideas that are helpful in using the whole of government. We have a huge government, if it only would open again, that can do things that will win the argument, that can provide aid, that can support education, that can promote public-private partnerships, and that can project the fact that we abide by the rule of law. So I'm as excited as I have ever been about this stuff. Some of you wanted to know why I left Congress. Well, 17 years was a long time. The Wilson job is considered one of the really few plum jobs on policy in Washington. Lee Hamilton, whom some of you may know, who's a highly regarded former member of Congress, had led the Wilson Center for 12 years. Before him was a guy named Jim Billington, whom some of you may know, who's now the Librarian of Congress and an expert on Russia. A woman had never done it. It was just huge. And when the headhunters for Wilson approached me during what's called the lame duck session of Congress, Congress always or never gets its work done. So in December, there we are, working against the clock to pass whatever was left of the prior year's budget and some crucial legislation. And so it was about December 20th, and the headhunters for the Wilson Center called and said they had not filled the vacancy left by Lee's retirement, which had occurred 4 months earlier. They had interviewed a lot of people, many extraordinary people, so I'm not sure why they didn't fill it, but they didn't, and they called me, and I remember going home and saying, so Sidney, the headhunters for Wilson just called, and they want to interview me. What do you think? And he said, do it. Get out of there. So those of you who know Sidney know that that's the way he talked. And I said, well, honey, they hadn't even, I haven't been interviewed. Oh, you'll get the job. And, which I did. But when you get out of there, you'll see that being in a nonpartisan place where the scholarship is excellent and where the goal is to connect scholarship to policy options. That's not something Congress does. I know I'm shocking you all. And where you're a mile from Capitol Hill and all the people on the Hill will want to participate in what you do and you keep all your friendships going, and where you might even be home on a few weekends, that'd be great. So I did pursue it. I did get the job offer, and of course, my goal was to spend much more time with Sidney. On day 9, after I started the Wilson job, he was a little tired. Nobody can believe he was tired. He was only 92 and a half, and in the prime of health, no kidding, and went to his doctor out. He was out here, actually, teaching at USC that week. The guy said, oh, you're fine. Let's take a routine blood test. And, of course, it came back, and he had acute myeloid leukemia. I don't recommend that any of you get that. And he died 5 weeks later. It was just stunning. But the good news is, number one, he was around for 92 and a half years and touched USC in many ways, and his wife of 30-plus years, and our children. But the other good news is, at least for me personally, that I am at the Wilson Center. I'm in a fabulous perch to work on the things I'm passionate about. Some of you know, forget the awards, but here's, in addition to running Wilson, I am on the Defense Policy Board, the Foreign Policy Board, which was set up by Hillary Clinton and now reports to John Kerry, the CIA External Board, the DNI Strategy Group, and I just agreed to go on the Homeland Security Board for the new secretary, whoever that is. And I still live here. So what could be better? Thank you very much. Okay. Now we're going to do this.
In the interest of full disclosure, the Congresswoman and I have known each other for about a decade now, and she was a staunch supporter when I was in the governor's office, came quite often to many port events. And I never said this, I'm going to say this publicly. I want to thank you personally for all your support. She's seen me at my best and my worst, a couple of phone calls, well into the morning hours, about 2 or 3 a.m. when I was a nominee, and things weren't going so well. And I want to just say, as we talked about this before, there are a number of open positions now at all levels of government, particularly in national security. And I just might ask you, how does that impact our national and homeland security, and is it going to ever change? And I say that because when I was a nominee and there were openings for quite some time was when Mr. Abdul Muttalib got on a plane. And it didn't seem to change anyone's priorities with regards to urgency.
Well, I'm really surprised that the Obama administration didn't fill the Secretary of Homeland Security slot before 9/11 this year. My understanding is that Janet Napolitano, who has been a friend of mine for 25 years or more, I met her when she was a young lawyer in Phoenix, and she claimed she had a perm. I have no recollection of that, but I always thought she was a very smart woman. Janet told the president in June or so that she had been selected for this big new job, and it's not a new job, new to her, job at the UC system, and would be leaving in September. That was to give him plenty of time to select a replacement. And I don't believe, I could be wrong, I don't want to reveal any secrets, but it's not a secret, I don't think anyone's been vetted for that job yet. I testified before the Senate Homeland Committee on 9/11 with Tom Ridge, and Thad Allen, who's my personal favorite choice for that job, and Stuart Baker, who's a lawyer who's very involved in a lot of these issues. And Tom Carper, senator from Delaware, said, I haven't checked this, that there are 16 open positions at Homeland and only 4 nominees. And you know, what can I say? I don't get it. I know the White House is busy. A few little things like Iran, Syria, and so forth are going on, and they're very important. I don't want to minimize any of that, plus this insanity in Congress about the budget. But I think it is crucial that we fill these positions with qualified people. There are a lot of qualified people out there. In fact, lots of you are sitting right in front of me, and one guy next to me. And I don't get it.
Before we open it, I'd like to ask one more question. You mentioned online radicalization. And I have the honor and privilege of serving on the Bipartisan Policy Center for Congressman Hamilton and Governor Kane, along with Peter Bergen and Fran and others. We wrote a report several years ago on online radicalization, and we suggested some somewhat aggressive monitoring. How far can we go? How far should we go?
Well, we can go beyond where we are. I authored in 2007 in the House, I forget the formal name, but it was the Terrorism Prevention and Something Act. And the point of it was to set up a multidisciplinary committee to advise Congress, that's all it was going to do, advise Congress on when somebody who has radical views, which are protected by our Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of belief, protected. When that person hits the gray area where those views will cause him or her to act in a violent way, whether it's the views that will cause them or someone will intersect the person with those views and generate the impetus to act violently. Violent action is not protected by our Constitution. So the hard part, and I'm sure you get this, Earl, is to intervene in that gray area. And the point of this committee was to help Congress understand how to identify that. I don't remember your recommendations, but I'm guessing we were in the same area. My bill passed Congress twice. I remember the last time it passed, it it passed by 404 to 20. Nothing passes Congress by 404 to 20 anymore. And it was on the leadership calendar. They thought it was a big deal. Went over to the Senate, and my friend Susan Collins, Republican senator from Maine, who was then chairman, I think, of the Senate Homeland Committee, and who remains my dearest friend. I was telling this to Lee Baca. We call ourselves the Bipartisan Bicameral Sister Act. But Susan introduced it. And then an unnamed civil liberties group all of a sudden decided that this bill was a reinvention of COINTELPRO for the oldies in the room who know anything about this. And it would engage, you know, it would generate Big Brother in a way that would be enormously harmful. This was just to create an interdisciplinary committee to advise Congress on strategies. That was it. And they started doing protest rallies in the districts of key senators, and the bill died. And I think we're at a disadvantage because we don't employ very good strategies to identify some of these folks. I want to give a shout out to Lee because I remember, and I'm sure he still has it, this outreach effort he has to not just Muslim communities. I remember there were Sikhs and others, minority communities in this county where he personally, because I went with him, has built trust relationships with a number of folks who are direct community organizations, and the goal is obviously not just the organizations but the families in these communities through people whom they trust. If you're in a mosque or in a, you know, somewhere else, in a school, in a family with somebody acting weird whose behavior looks to you like it could cross over into that space, you want to be able to trust law enforcement or community leaders to help you. And that is a really good thing. I don't know that that's sufficient, but I think that is a really good thing. And so for those of you who are working on that effort in LA County and other counties, thank you.
So I'd like to open it up to the floor. We have a lot of folks here today. Again, thank you for coming out to support us. And is there anybody who has a question for the Congressman? Yes. So just wait for the mic. Okay.
Hello. Thank you for coming and talking to us today. I'm actually a master's student at Price, so yay Price. I just came from a drone conference at RAND, and they were talking about the application of drones in security protocols for terrorism locally in like the civilian space. How do you feel about having drones in the civilian space, and would it actually enhance national security?
I'm glad you raised that. I'm very worried about that. The Homeland Department 5 or 6 years ago had a program, the name of which I've forgotten, that was going to task intelligence satellites to do domestic surveillance work. The protocols were allegedly very tightly drawn. I actually read them and spent some time with Mike Chertoff, this is when he was Homeland Secretary, discussing them, and then I got the program defunded. I thought it was very scary. I know, and Wanda knows better, what the capacity is, and the capacity today is half what it's going to be next year, of things that fly over people. And drones dwell silently. They're much cheaper than satellites. They don't have all that capability, but they have enough, or they will have enough, to shred our Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment requires an individualized warrant in order to investigate someone, read the content of that person's communications, listen to that person, et cetera, et cetera. And there just was a Supreme Court case about little devices being put in cars to track people. Of course I know, and you know, that those devices are in your cell phones and everywhere else, but the government's not doing it to you. So I'm very worried about the expanded use of drones over the U.S. I get it when there's a large outdoor activity and there could be like a Super Bowl or something like that, or a huge natural disaster, but I don't get it if it's either in the hands of local law enforcement. I'd love it if somebody disagrees, just explain to me why we need to do this, or worse, in private hands. Because one of the proposal out there, the FAA has said that by 2015, they want people to bid on the use of domestic airspace for drones. And it's people, it's not just law enforcement. So what private company needs to be using drones over my house, is what my question is. And while we're talking about local authorities, Michael DiVirgilio, who came with me today, is about to be the mayor of Hermosa Beach again in a month. And I'd be interested in your ideas, not just about drones, but about ways in which cities in this county could better access some of the things that Create does. Not that you're not thinking about it, but just in case you miss something. So I'm sort of forcing Michael to talk.
Thank you for forcing me to talk. I mean, I think the thing that's on my mind is partly what I was talking to Dr. Austin about, is that it's so natural to think of the big targets, and we should be thinking of the big and obvious targets, but so much of the strategies that you're even talking about up there today are really about who you know on a day-to-day basis, about the kind of things that the sheriff is doing that you mentioned. And I think it's maybe the question I might have is, are people who are thinking about the big strategy, are they recognizing that at the end of the day we really need the small individual block by block neighborhood communities paying attention? It's who do I know in my life, who do our police officers on a day-to-day basis recognize what's normal in our community or in your community, that they're empowered to be, they're informed, they're educated, they're a part of a grander strategy, but also that they know how to trade that information back, and they know to be vigilant at it. Because we do focus, I think it's natural to focus on the big stuff, but it's the little things that you might know in the neighborhood because you've been there, because you know the nuances.
Earl, I don't want to be directing this, however, why not? I just want to make a comment and see if Lee Baca wants to say something. But my comment is, no, he doesn't want to say something. My comment is that I remember one of the early plots we foiled in these parts was foiled by the Torrance PD. There was a string of gas station robberies. Anybody remember that? And somebody thought this didn't make a lot of sense and got warrants and investigated the home of a couple of the guys, and of course it turned out to be a terrorism ring that had started in one of the state prisons. That's a way people can be radicalized, not the only way, but that's what happened. And in the guy's house there were documents, plans for to attack a military recruiting center and I don't know if it was a synagogue, I think a synagogue. Yeah, and these guys were tried on terrorism charges and they're in prison for 25 years. So, Torrance PD did just what you're talking about, Michael.
You had talked a little bit about value systems when you were up at the podium. How do you get ahead of the curve of radicalization from a philosophical perspective, if you will? How do you front end that, as opposed to, what draws somebody to that, and it's not just internally here in the U.S., but abroad. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think about that, and Lee's not talking, but Lee has thought a lot about that. Lee's my resident philosopher. You are. Who are these people, as the FBI calls them, these pissed off people? They're, in our country, these are lost kids. Adam Gadon, who was Jewish from Orange County, whose parents were hippies, or if he had parents, and lived in some place or other, became, I think he's still alive, the chief PR guy for Al-Qaeda Central. He surfed the web. He was a loner. We know lots of people like that. On the web now are the most sophisticated recruiting tools. Most of you must know about Inspire magazine, which is produced in the boonies of Yemen by English-speaking people. I think some of them may be American Yemenis, maybe. Speak colloquial English. That's where the Boston Marathon guys learned how to make the bomb, the pressure cooker bomb. They have an article in one of the early editions. I read it. It's on my desk at work. How to build a bomb in the kitchen of your mom. And it's all about pressure cookers. That's where the latest encryption tools are being communicated and used. The front of the magazine has selected quotes from the Quran. Selected in a way to present a picture that, to make jihad, which used to be just to be a religious person, the word has even been hijacked, you have to commit violent acts. And if you're undereducated or alienated and you read this tract, some people buy it. And radicalization usually requires intervention by humans too. So some of them go to mosques, if we're just talking about radicalizing Muslims. Again, not every radical person is a Muslim. I mean, just look at the anarchists in the House of Representatives. I couldn't resist. But I'd call them radicals. Entitled to their beliefs, but not entitled to take our government down for those beliefs. That's my point. But so I think that's how it happens. How do we intervene there? Again, family members, if they have any, or school members, or church members, or neighbors might observe some of this, not in every case. But also, other stuff should be out there, opportunity. And linking school to jobs is really important. Being unemployed when you're 22 for long periods of time is not good, especially if you're sitting on a curb in Saudi Arabia. Most of the hijackers on 9/11 were well-educated, unemployed kids. That's who they were. And we need to create better opportunities for that. And that's something the U.S. can help with.
If I could add to that, the other challenge we have is this myopic view of people only retaining or adhering to one ideology. One of the things we found out, I went to Folsom where the JIS cell, which the Congressman referred to, the plot we had in 2005, where that cell was hatched. And what I found there in one instance was a young man who was part of a Mexican street gang who, through his life, had been a devil worshiper, had recently converted to Islam, and was trying to practice all three. He now is a member of Nuestra Familia, which is the Mexican mafia. So how do you, if you will, profile this person in order to know what ideology to look for? And if you haven't followed the older Tsarnaev brother, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, although he was attached to a radical form or extremist form of Islam, we're finding out now he was also a member of a neo-Nazi organization. So there's the hybridization that we're seeing now makes it extremely difficult to put people into one category to even start to know what their challenges are and how we might detect them to do something about it.
It's a very tough question, and finding the answer to that is going to help us beat this.
Question, what do we do about countries like Mali, Somalia, or Afghanistan, for that matter, that lack the governance to contain terrorism?
Well, failing states are ripe for terrorism, and you picked some good ones. The president, just as it happens, the president of Somalia, a guy named Mohammed, was at the Wilson Center 10 days ago on his way last week to the UN General Assembly, which is where everybody you've ever heard of was, including me. But it is where John Kerry met the foreign minister of Iran, et cetera, et cetera. But he claims, and his sponsor, the guy who really wanted him to come to Wilson, is a member of Congress named Keith Ellison, who is a Muslim convert from Minnesota, and who went to Somalia over the objections of our government to check it out 9 months ago, and was enormously impressed with how Somalia has beat back the al-Shabaab problem. I know we just saw it in Nairobi. It ain't dead. But the cities of Somalia, according to Keith and to Mohammed, are now safe. So project, underway, improvement. Wouldn't say that's true in Mali yet, although the French intervened to try to push the bad guys back into the boonies. And Afghanistan is a work in progress. I have serious worry that the endemic corruption there, some of you have been there, I bet Lee and others. How many of you have been to Afghanistan lately? Really? Okay. Well, the endemic corruption there may prevent it from ever getting well. I was not a fan, am not a fan of our counterinsurgency effort there. I thought it was right definitely right, and I voted for it, to do everything we could to defeat the Taliban. But I never thought that clear, hold, and build, this very intensive strategy, was going to work in a place like that, given the endemic corruption. And it hasn't worked, in my view. But we have to, what can we do, if that's the question? We can help governments succeed, help build stability. That doesn't mean by supporting necessarily, in fact, hopefully not military juntas who are not espousing any form of democratic values. But in many of these countries, some focused help by our government on development and on helping with education, and even on helping train police could be very, very useful. And we should be doing that where we can. I think that's projecting the best of America.
Hi, thanks for being here, over here. So kind of in the midst of the budget showdown are, I guess, a few cycles of reduced and level funding for things like the DHS R&D line item. How does that impact the ability of the agency to not only recruit, creative minds that will, develop technology to do all the things that we're talking about, but also the agency's ability to carry out its mission using new technologies?
I didn't hear what the funding issue is.
The DHS R&D budget item.
R&D, DHS
yeah,
R&D.
Yep.
Sorry, I was just old and deaf. It hurts. I mean, when DHS was formed, I was there, I'm one of its godmothers. I thought, as many of us did, that the concept was overbroad, but it was the proposal of the Bush White House, and we knew President Bush would be strongly behind it, and we made a pragmatic judgment that we ought to support what he supported, therefore it would pass, and it did. And I don't know if it was, I think it was Congress that said, okay, 22 departments and agencies, huge. We're going to have 4 lines of focus, and one of them was intelligence. The intelligence function at DHS, I think, is still anemic. It's never become what it should, but another one of the lines was R&D. And DHS and government in general is in a great position to support technologies that will help us evolve ahead of the bad guys. So if you're asking, how much does it hurt if we don't fund this? Big time is my answer. And what are we going to be able to do as a government with these crazy anarchists in the House of Representatives who are holding the government hostage? I don't know. I mean, I seriously don't know how this is going to work out going forward. I think sequestration is one of the worst ideas ever, and nobody knows how to get out of that. And I think it will hurt substantially our readiness. I know a lot about how it's affecting the Defense Department. And for sure, it's affecting Homeland, too. So it's a bad scene. And it's very important that our government do things that the private sector alone cannot accomplish. And R&D is one of those. And provide, so far as I know, the Constitution still requires Congress to provide for the common defense. And I think R&D in the Homeland Department is part of Congress's obligation.
I'd like to, if you would, go to Professor Hakela. I'll be in big trouble if you don't. He's another person in this room of several who's seen me on my best day and my worst day, having been my doctoral chair. So I think taking his question would be wise.
I've only seen your best days, as far as I'm aware, Errol.
Oh, yeah, that was a softball. I've seen his worst days. They were okay.
Okay, right. Premise for my question is that as technology evolves and as the threat of terrorism grows, there is likely and reasonably going to be a kind of a rebalance, regrettably, but a rebalance where civil liberties are diminished, I'm going to stress, because I'm willing to give up some of my civil liberties in order to make sure that the bad guy is also giving up some of his or her civil liberties so that we can guard them, because the threat of missing action is becoming ever larger.
And the thrust of it is something I absolutely believe, which is that security and liberty are not a zero-sum game. They are not. It's not a balance. You don't get more of one and less of the other. You either get more of both or less of both. And that's how we have to think about policy options. And it was Ben Franklin, who's even older than Sidney Harman was, who said, he that surrenders A bit of liberty for security deserves neither. That's sort of kind of what he said. Sidney would have known what the exact quote was, but hey. In the case of surveillance, that's what I talk about, because I think you're asking certainly about that. I was in the Carter White House in 1978. I was 5 years old when FISA passed, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and that was a careful attempt by Congress and the White House to craft a way to do surveillance, foreign intelligence surveillance. Remember the foreign part, it still applies, in a way that would build in checks and balances. And to remind you all, the idea was there would be a FISA court, which is a federal court, with rotating federal judges who would review on an individual basis which Americans' content might be looked at if they were connected to a foreign source. And Congress would be fully briefed on what was going on to implement the policy. And the intelligence committees were set up to do this. That's when they were formed in 1978. And all of this was in response to the Church Commission, if anybody remembers that, which was in response to abuses by the Nixon administration of individual privacy. So FISA was set up in 1978 and worked beautifully until 9/11, at which point there was a much higher demand for data. And the Bush administration made a judgment that to get this data and run a program, they had to ignore FISA. They couldn't run it through FISA because FISA was antiquated. And they set up a new system outside of FISA under the President's Article 2 Commander-in-Chief authorities. The President does have authority, you would all understand this, in emergencies as Commander-in-Chief to do stuff. And I was there. I was a member of the Gang of Eight. The Gang of Eight is the chairman and ranking member of the two intelligence committees and the leadership, Democrat and Republican, of both houses. So that's 8 people who get briefed on the most innermost secrets of the government, or some of them anyway. And I was in the meetings where this phone metadata program was described. And every third line was, and it fully complies with law. Of course, oops, nobody mentioned that it was being run outside of FISA. And when it was ultimately disclosed, and I could check this out in 2005, I discovered this, that it was basically a rogue program. And that's what, if anybody remembers John Ashcroft and the emergency hospital visit and the whole thing, that was all about this. There almost was a mass resignation in the Bush White House over this program. At any rate, then Congress made a long effort, which I was involved in, to amend FISA so it would have more modern authorities. We don't have to go into this, and put the program back under FISA. So I'm telling this sad story because I believe the checks and balances in a program like that do work. I don't know whether the amount of data we collect is too much or not enough. I don't know whether keeping it for 5 years instead of 2 years is too much or not enough. Congress is going to legislate. I cringe a little to think how that's going to come out, but I have great respect for Dianne Feinstein, whom I just had dinner with on Sunday, and we talked at length about this, who is trying to come at this in a responsible way. So there are checks and balances, and the right way to do this is to build in the protections at the same time we build in the security measures. So I think we can do this.
Do a moments from a clean getaway. This is always the fun part for me. So, again, as a friend and someone who's been a supporter for at least a third of my career, and always a supporter of CREATE, a Trojan mom, a USC trustee.
Now I was getting it.
And someone who we have tremendous respect and admiration for, we'd like to give you a small token of our appreciation from CREATE on behalf of my director and the university. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Earl. And I know who that is.
Tommy Trojan.
Tommy. That's Tommy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
So,
right. So
As I said, you were moments from a clean getaway. We have, if you will, an honor, a real honor today. If I could bring up our university president, CL Max Nikias.
When did he get here? How long has he been here?
I don't know, he must have just arrived. Perfect. I will leave this to you. I'll take this for you.
When did you get here? Are you spying on me?
Jane, I miss you. Nice to see you. I just came to greet you.
That's so sweet. I had no idea. Oh, but you were going to say something to these people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was told that Jane Harman was going to be here, and I said, how can I not show up?
Oh.
So that's why I'm here, Jane. She's been a wonderful trustee for the university, as you know, and we're very proud of you. And aren't you glad that you're not a member of Congress, given what's going on?
So I have to tell a Max story. Here's my Max story. I knew Max before he was Max. So I'm living in Palos Verdes. Lee remembered that. And there's this whole crazy Greek community in Palos Verdes. Did you know?
South Bay.
Well, in the South Bay, in Redondo Beach. And so I'm, having my difficult efforts to being elected to Congress, and this Greek community really embraced me. And so I met one of those people, this one, then. Before you were teaching here, but you weren't even the head of the. But you weren't head of the engineering department yet.
I was just a faculty member.
Just a faculty member at USC, and I was just a lowly member of Congress. So this goes back a long way. And the other thing I want to say about Max, I do now that he's here, you're stuck. I think he's a fantastic president of the absolutely best university. Well, I'm totally unbiased. I like some other universities, but clearly the best university in California, by far.
Thank you, Jerry.
I was telling my Sidney Harman story, and Sidney thought that this place was extraordinary. And a lot of the creativity and the just the ferment and the quest for learning comes from the Greek tradition. And so it just is a coincidence that one of the crazy Greeks from the South Bay heads this university. And Sidney, if he were still here, would be so proud to see the growth here. And he was so proud of the Harman Academy. Yeah. And I just can't tell you, Max, you shut up, so it's too bad, that things like CREATE give so much luster to this place, and your support for this, and your support for some of the other most innovative programs that are here, just do an enormous credit on our state. So I'm still a resident of California. I still vote for Lee Baca, and no matter what, and it means a lot to me to be home. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.